right, now, some of these questions you might not like, so I'm sorry.
She refused to show me these questions,
Yeah, you haven't.
so I couldn't compare.
So, okay, what does it mean to make a poem? Sorry.
Wow. What does it mean to make a poem? Well, I mean, what does it mean? So there'll be a lot of long pauses in this conversation this morning as I try to figure out answers to Sarah's questions.
They'll edit those out.
They'll edit those out? Oh, okay, thank you. I want to do this without sounding too fatuous, but of course, platitudes are what immediately come to my mind. But it's an act of perception, I think, first of all. I think one of the things that continues to interest me as a poet, and I know you too, is that it forces us to continue to look at the world, to look at things in the world. It forces us to respond to them with whatever senses are locked in our heads. So there is that. There's that it is almost a kind of personal exercise. That's certainly part of it. That I think my life would probably be less without it. Other people use different kinds of things. You know, Evan hears music wherever he is in the world. Other people see images. I look for words. So there's that. And then there is the other thing about this particular art, which is also shared with certain others of other arts. That when we do this, when we're in the process of making those poems, we are connected with people who have been trying to do this for several millennia, people who have been trying to use words to organize experience. And when I stop and think about that, it's kind of cool. And I do stop and think about it. You know, people have been trying to do this for a long time before the invention of writing. People were trying to organize the words into meaningful, often musical, often little sonic moments, memorable moments that would help them understand experience. And so it's in all languages. So it's a nice kind of connection that way. I like it.
Great.
I like it.
Okay, so the next question is also one of these big questions.
Sure.
What is the role of beauty in a poem? You could also say, what's the role of beauty in your poems? Thinking about beauty.
This is actually one skating around things I was thinking about, saying, okay, what's Sarah going to ask me? Because it's, you know, whatever the role of the arts is in general, I mean, it's going to, the arts touch on other kinds of human experience, spiritual experience, psychological experience, but they are not those things. The arts are not, in and of themselves, a spiritual exercise or a psychological exercise. They are an exploration of the aesthetic in us, the exploration of beauty. But what is beauty? And I don't want to say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, because maybe it's not. Then I'd be wrong. But there's a recognition in us of there is a need. There seems to be a need in our species for an aesthetic response to the world, and that aesthetic response is a response to beauty. But beauty could be a lot of different kinds of things. I happen to respond probably most profoundly at this point in my life to things in the natural world. Both the manifestations of things, and then it gets me worked up and gets me involved in certain kinds of activism. It's a good deal of my study, not my exclusive study, but a good deal of my study is to learn things about the natural world. And I find those things beautiful. I can find those things beautiful when I see a bald eagle tear apart a dead carp that's been lying there and rotting for 2.5 weeks. I can find it beautiful when I see a Cooper's hawk eat a tufted titmouse in my backyard, and I watch it devour absolutely everything, and then go looking for bones and drops of blood afterward and don't find them. to keep that whole thing, to not have any blood in the snow. And I know that there are people, there are poets, lots of poets, who respond to things in the world that we consider ugly, and they don't try to make them beautiful, quote unquote beautiful, but yet the response is an aesthetic response, and I think important as an aesthetic response. So what is the role of beauty?
Wait, what you
Okay.
just said was really amazing.
Oh.
Like about that it's not necessarily a beautiful thing, but the response is an aesthetic response.
Right, and that's important. I
Can you
don't
say
think that's
more?
a feat.
Can you say more about that? Because I've never thought of it that way, but I think you're really right. That's so maybe is it that?
Thinking on the feet or
Is
on the
the-
left, I'm thinking
Well,
fast.
is the thing okay?
Go ahead.
Tim O'Brien has this phrase in The Things That Carry where he says, "The mind hates it, but the eyes do not." So he's responding to this moment in Vietnam where his friend stepped backwards. He was playing catch with his friend, and his friend stepped backwards onto a landmine and blew up. But in his first response to it was that it looked really beautiful.
Yeah.
But then his mind figured out what had happened, and it was horrible.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if that's something about what you're saying a little bit, like that there's something that's ugly, but somehow, it's not that it's erasing the ugliness by rendering it in language, but is there something that happens with, you said aesthetic? I don't know the answer, I'm just saying.
No, and I don't either, but it seems to me very, very clear. I mean, just given the absolutely visceral necessity that so many different kinds of people in different kinds of places have felt, a need they have felt for some kind of artistic expression. You know, it cuts across class, it cuts across race, it cuts across nationality, it cuts across language. That there is a need to recognize and formalize our response to things in a way that I can only call aesthetic, artful. And that is tied in with what beauty may be. I mean, I do like that. I mean, I think he got Stockhausen, was it Stockhausen in 2001? Yeah. Who said, German composer of weird music, who said that 9/11 was the height of an artistic moment, and that's kind of what we're saying here with Tim Brown. I mean, he wasn't justifying it, although he spent the next 10 years trying to explain his response. But there's, you know, we skate toward that direction, which is dangerous and which is, you know, not going to play well on CNN. But it's kind of interesting, and the Tim O'Brien thing is pretty good. It's not quite what I mean, but I think it's close. I mean, O'Brien really is meaning there's something before the horror registers. There's something beautiful in the display of things.
Well, maybe it's getting back to what you said first about perception. Like there's a perception.
Yeah. But it's a difficult question, and you know, I mean, particularly, most of the stuff I've written in the last 15, 20 years is more conventionally beautiful. I like to write about birds, you know. I like to write about trees. I like to write about the Great Lakes. You know, it's pretty hard not to say that those are beautiful. You know, I'm also continuing to try to write about my great-grandmother's suicide, so there's nothing particularly beautiful about that moment, but the response is an organizing response, which is aesthetic, which I think deals with the nature of beauty. But it's tough. I have, you know.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Sure.
You know, the nature of beauty has to have the opposite.
Exactly.
In order that we can experience beauty in a different way.
Right.
And saying the unsayable is what I believe poetry does for me.
Yeah. Good. Good. And probably the only thing I'd add is that with the opposites being there, that maybe whatever our sense of what is beautiful encircles both of those.
Yes.
And